Hi, so this is going to be kind of long because there is a lot of context that I have to mention for everything to make sense. I, 33F, got divorced a couple of months ago, but it had been in the works for almost a year. I met my ex-husband James through friends when I was 25, and after dating for 2 years, we decided to move in together and get married. His family was a little conservative and traditional and did not approve of live-in relationships, so we had to get married if we wanted to stay together. And I really liked James, so I didn't see a problem marrying him. My parents were also on board with that decision, and so we got married. Within a year of living together, I found out that I was pregnant and we were overjoyed. It felt like our family was really coming together and everything was kind of falling into place. But unfortunately, when I announced that I was pregnant, my in-laws started pressuring me to quit my job and focus on being a mother. It didn't make it any easier that my job was not very lenient with the maternity leave, and since it hadn't really been a long time that I had been working with them, my maternity leave would be especially short. So at the time, I weighed the pros against the cons and decided to quit my job. It was not a decision that I made alone, everybody had been a part of it. James and his parents kept telling me that it would be the best decision in the long run, and I simply had to do it. James seemed pretty sure of everything and said that he would take care of the family. I didn't have to worry about the money. He would bring enough home, and all that I had to think about was raising our kid. My parents and my older brother also thought that it would be for the best if I quit my job and stayed at home, because that's what my mother had done. And even though she had the choice of going back to work, she chose not to because this was a priority for her. I had a lot of pressure on me from both sides of the family, so I decided to quit when I was in my second trimester. Everything had been going well and I had full faith in my husband that he would never let me down, which is why I left my flourishing career to be a stay-at-home mom. However, soon after my son was born, I realized that there was something strange about the way James had been behaving in the last few months of my pregnancy. I could never quite put my finger on it, but there was something off about his energy and everything. Sure, he seemed happy when our son was born, and I thought things would go back to normal, but instead, it started getting worse. He started being very irritable around me, and any time I would try to talk to him, he would just snap at me. The only time that he seemed happy and content with life was when he was playing with our son, but other than that, it always felt like he was very annoyed to be at home with me. So he would spend long hours at work, and even on the weekends, he would consistently come up with some excuse not to spend time with me. I just couldn't understand what was going wrong, but I kept trying my best to make our marriage work because, unlike him, I loved him and I didn't want to give up on us. This trend continued for about 2 years after my son was born. He would stay at work for way longer than he needed to, and even when he was at home, he wasn't really with me. I couldn't exactly complain about it, because every time I would try to talk to him about it, he would just tell me that he was really tired from work and it was not an easy task for him to be the sole breadwinner for the household. And that was really insulting for me, because it wasn't as though I was not capable of bringing home money for myself, but I had to rely on him because he had promised me that he would make it easy on me. A couple of times, I even asked him if he would prefer for me to go back to work, so then we could split all the expenses and he wouldn't have to take so much pressure, but he said that it was an insult to him and his capabilities. Besides, my in-laws would never approve of it and we would be in for a really hard time with them if I went back to work. So I continued to stay at home and raise my son, which is pretty much the only thing that brought me joy, because James had changed, and he was no longer the man that I had married. It was only about a year ago that I found out that James had actually been having an affair with one of his coworkers. It had been majorly difficult for me to find out about because honestly, I had been kind of suspicious about it for a long time. I had even snooped through his phone and laptop a couple of times when he was asleep, but I found nothing. I knew all his passwords because he wrote them down in his notepad, but even that didn't help. It almost felt like he had nothing to hide, and I felt like an idiot for even being suspicious of him. I even went through his belongings to look for a burner phone or whatever, but I again found nothing. At one point, I had actually started to believe that maybe I was just being paranoid and insecure, but the universe had my back, and the proof of his cheating was something that I saw for myself. James and I were throwing our son a pretty grand birthday party about a year ago, and he had invited the co-worker. He had been cheating on me. She was a single mother with a son around my son's age, so I didn't find it strange that he had invited her. He had also told me that she was a really close friend of his, so I didn't find it unnecessary at all. After my son had cut his birthday cake, I decided to go to the upstairs bedroom because I wanted to change into something more comfortable for the party, but when I walked into my bedroom, I realized that my husband was already in there. And so was his coworker, on his lap. They were full on making out when I walked in on them, and it took me a couple of minutes to even process what I was witnessing. First of all, it was my bedroom that the two of them were going in, and that was the most horrifying part of it. And secondly, they didn't even break apart when they heard the door opening. So I had to walk all the way over to them and make my presence felt for them to snap out of it. I'm pretty sure that they thought that it would be fun to make out in my bedroom, in my house, just for the thrill of it, but they probably didn't count on me having a complete breakdown over it. I'm not proud of it, but knowing that what I had been suspecting for so long was actually true made something snap inside of me. I grabbed the coworker by her hair and started dragging her outside the room, and I was unstoppable from what I was told. James is considerably stronger than me, but he couldn't stop me, and I don't even remember most of it because I think I had a rage blackout. I dragged her downstairs with me with James right behind me, and pushed her into the middle of the room, while everyone was there. I don't remember most of the things that I said, but apparently, I called her a bunch of derogatory names and told everybody what she and James had been getting up to in my bedroom. I didn't even care that my son was right there and so were a bunch of his friends. Now that I look back on it, it's extremely embarrassing and inappropriate, but at the time, that didn't even occur to me and I was just screaming at the top of my lungs. My parents, my brother, and my in-laws were also present there, and I think it was my father who finally calmed me down and took me back to my room. Once I was inside my room, I completely broke down and started crying. I was sobbing uncontrollably, but instead of staying with me and comforting me, my dad locked me inside my room and went back out. I guess I should have known instantly that my parents didn't care about me. I had always known that they cared more about appearances than being real, but that was just insane. Nobody came to check up on me for the next couple of hours, and even after I had calmed down considerably, I had no idea what was going on outside. I didn't even have my phone, so I couldn't even ask anyone. It was only after midnight that I was escorted out of the room by my brother, who didn't even ask me how I was doing. They probably would have made me stay in the room for longer if I hadn't started banging on it like a crazy person. When I came out, I asked my brother what had happened after I had been locked in, and he told me that pretty much everyone cleared out after my breakdown. He also said that James had left with his parents and my son, and the only people in the house at the time for me, my parents and him, and he had let me out of the room so we could discuss what we were going to do about this now. But my family's idea of a discussion meant telling me that I had to apologize to all my guests for the way that I had behaved at the party. And not just that, but I also had to apologize to my in-laws and James for what I did. They told me that he had found it extremely difficult to convince his co-worker not to press charges against me because what I had done was an act of physical violence against her. So now, I owed it to him to talk about this and work things through instead of making this a big deal. I freaked out at them and told them to get out of my house because I was not going to allow them to stand under my roof and tell me that I had to apologize to my cheating husband. I got into a huge fight with my family because they were telling me that I owed it to him to make things right and give this marriage a second shot, or else, they would cut ties with me. So I told them to go ahead because I had reached a point where I couldn't care less about what anybody else thought of me. I was going to file for divorce and get out of this mess, and I didn't need anybody's permission for it. So I contacted a lawyer the very next day and filed for divorce within a week of the incident. James was served soon after, and he actually had the audacity to be disappointed and shocked. He came back home the day that he was served with the divorce papers and demanded an explanation. I told him that there was no way that I was going to take him back after what he had done and the way he had insulted me. We got into a nasty verbal argument where I said a lot of things to him and called him a lot of names, and he ended up promising me that I would never be able to see my son again. But I didn't realize that he would actually ensure that he lived up to his words. Then, the legal battle began. The divorce proceedings were easier and simpler compared to the custody battle since we had very few joint assets to speak of. The house belonged to me and there was no question about it because I had purchased it with my own money. Everything else was going to be sold and the cost would be split between the two of us. We just had to wait for 6 months due to the waiting period in our state, and after that, once we had come to a settlement, the divorce would come through. The only thing that we couldn't agree upon was the alimony that was due because I had to start from scratch since he had forced me to quit my job and I didn't have enough money of my own. He thought that I shouldn't get any alimony at all, but of course, that was not possible since he had told me that he was going to help me and make sure that I never felt the need to work. Thankfully, I had a couple of texts to prove that, or else I might not even have been able to get that alimony. The divorce process was emotionally easier for me to deal with because, in my head, I had already disconnected from James. But the custody battle is what really screwed me up because unfortunately, my parents and my brother decided to stab me in the back for money. My ex-husband and his lawyer were horrible people who started making a case against me for being a terribly careless and psychotic mother to prove that I was not capable enough of handling the task of raising my son on my own, so James and his parents were supposed to have full custody. Now I assumed that my parents and brother had to be bought out by my ex-in-laws because they were seriously loaded and I couldn't think of any other explanation as to why they would turn on me. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they even started sucking up to my in-laws in the first place because of their money. Anyway, James accused me of being incapable and unfit to raise our son and demanded full custody, because apparently, I was a functioning alcoholic with serious anger issues. They made up several incidents where apparently, I had lost my temper and put my son at risk of being hurt. Of course, none of that had ever happened, but they needed something to make me look like the bad guy. I thought that at least some people would be on my side on this, but all my friends decided to take his side on this. And I think a lot of that had to do with my breakdown at my son's birthday party. But the worst betrayal of it all was when my parents and my brother also testified in court against me and claimed that I needed rehab and serious intensive therapy before I was even allowed to be near my son, because I was clearly not in my right state of mind, and that was probably also what had driven James to cheat on me because he was sick of dealing with me. So unfortunately, even though I put up a good fight with my lawyer, I was unable to get custody of my son. The cards were stacked against me and there was very little that I could do to prevent the inevitable. My lawyer and I had been trying our best to put together scraps of evidence to prove that I was a good mother, but eventually, all of it went to waste. The verdict was announced a couple of months ago, and that was the last time that I saw my son in person. I did get supervised visiting rights, but James never let me see him anyway, so it's kind of pointless. He is 4 years old now, but he barely even gets to meet me, and I'm constantly afraid that he's going to forget about me when he grows up. From what I know from a couple of relatives who are still on my side, my family still gets to see him since they post pictures with my son all the time. James and my son are still living with my in-laws, and basically everybody gets to see him but me. I can't imagine something more heartbreaking than that. I had been living solely off of the memories of my son and myself, believing that at least he was taken care of by James. Because I don't think I would have been able to give him a nice life on my salary since I'm just starting out. I was able to get a job in my friend's company, but it's a startup and they don't really make much as of now. So my salary is not what one would expect from a woman in her 30s, and even the other employees there are all in their early 20s, just there for the experience so they can move on to better opportunities. I do get alimony every month, but it's really not enough because I still have to maintain the lifestyle I was living before, and I can't exactly live like a bachelor and cut costs. But this is all I have right now because of the massive gap in my resume. I had believed that once I cleaned up my act, I would apply for shared custody again and maybe I would stand a chance then. But the opportunity literally fell into my lap a couple of weeks ago, when my parents reached out to me after months of not being on speaking terms to ask me for help. The help that they needed was that they needed me to bail them out because, surprisingly, James was not the wonderful guy that they had believed him to be. My brother sent me an email saying that I needed to come over to their place ASAP because they had realized something huge and they wanted me to know because they were sick of hiding things from me and wanted to be a part of my life again. I tried to ignore that email that day, but I couldn't stop thinking that maybe this would help me with my son, so I went over to their place in the evening. When I did go, I had expected them to be living like kings because they had sold me out for money from my ex-in-laws, but if anything, they were living worse than before. My son was thrilled to see me, though, so that was the cherry on top of a fantastic evening. When I visited my family that day, they literally started begging for forgiveness. As soon as I walked in the door, because apparently, they had realized how badly they had screwed up, and there was no going back, but still wanted me to forgive them. After the divorce, when they approached my ex-in-laws and James to ask about the money that they had been promised, James told my family that that was not happening anymore. Apparently, it had only been insinuated that they would be compensated handsomely if they turned against me and testified in their favor, but there was nothing in writing to prove it, and if my family tried to backtrack and tell me about all of this, then they would just make sure that they never saw my son again. So for the sake of my son, they decided to keep their mouths shut, even though they were not even getting paid for it, like they had been promised. But it got worse because they had been used terribly, and not only had they been manipulated to testify against me, but they were also being treated like free babysitters. James would drop our son off at my parents' place every single day, and they had to watch him while sacrificing their own time. It was highly inconvenient because even my dad and my brother had jobs to attend to, and my mother couldn't handle all the household work and looking after her grandson all by herself because she was getting old. So either my dad or my brother would have to work from home every day, and it was becoming really difficult for them, which is why they had contacted me, to finally put an end to this. Apparently, they wanted to strike a deal with me and said that if I gave them the money that my ex-in-laws promised them, they would take my side this time in court and make sure that I got custody of my son. I was about to suggest this myself, but honestly, it was not surprising that they did it. My family had always been very materialistic, and even more so now that my dad's business had failed and they were back to working jobs for other people. Obviously, they would want money more than ever now because my dad wanted to retire, but he didn't even have enough money put aside since he had put all his money into the business and it went on to fail. They said that they could concoct some story about how they had been pressured and coerced into testifying against me, so they couldn't be charged with perjury while under oath. But little did know that I didn't actually need help anymore. I had been recording everything that they had said right from the second I stepped foot into the house because I knew that there was something messed up going on and I didn't want to take any risks. So I had everything on record anyway, but nevertheless, I told my family to send me the screenshots, if they had any, to prove that they had been used and lied to. And then, I told them that I would help them out and then left. I had already seen my son and I had more than enough proof to file for custody again. So that's what I did the next day with my lawyer, and this time, I was prepared. The custody case is still ongoing, but one thing is for sure, I'll be able to prove that none of the things that James had accused me of had been true and my family had been lying about everything all along. I've already played the recording and that has swayed things in my favor considerably. James and his lawyer are literally scrambling for evidence in their favor, and I am taking it all in and enjoying the show because this is what they had put me through last time and now, I get to do it to them. It's karma at its finest, and I couldn't be happier about it. The only thing that's been less than ideal. They have been claiming that I have also used them just like James did and that I had no right to record them without their consent and use it against them. But in my state, it's completely okay and admissible in court, so I didn't understand what they were referring to until they told me that I had betrayed their trust by recording them. These are bold words from people who betrayed my trust first by taking my ex-husband's side in the custody case. They believed that what I did was wrong because what they had done was out of necessity. They needed the money, but I didn't need to screw them over and put them at risk of perjury because they had already agreed to help me out and testify against James and his family, so I didn't have to go behind their back. They've been texting me relentlessly and it's getting harder for me to ignore. So Ida for going behind my family's back and putting them at risk of being charged with perjury? Update 1. Hello, everyone. The custody case is still ongoing, and James and his lawyer are trying their very hardest to prove that they have been telling the truth because of course, they might be facing charges and it's a felony so they might get jail time. But that's really not my concern right now and it shouldn't have been at any point. I don't even know why I was getting worried about my parents when they clearly didn't worry about me when it was my turn. So it's really just tit for tat right now. The comment section opened my eyes to how my parents were extremely entitled. But anyway, I have cut ties with them. All of them can go where they want to. I want my son to be alright and with me. I have waited long enough for this and I'm not going to let my family and their constant victimization of themselves. If they can sell me out for money, I don't think it's necessary for me to show any loyalty towards them. I'm done now. Update 2. So, the good news is that I finally got custody of my son. I don't think I've ever felt so happy in my entire life. The other good news is that my in-laws, James, and my family were charged with perjury and yes, they might go to jail for it. I bet they're regretting everything now. But I don't care about any of it because I got what I wanted. I got my son back and that's all I had ever asked for. From what I know, James is still trying to fight it and stay out of jail, but I don't think it's going to work. I've already filed for a restraining order against all of them because I've been receiving very threatening text messages and I am 100% sure that it has to be from these people. Because nobody else would want to harm me unless it's them. Things have been really busy and hectic for the past couple of weeks, but I'm learning to slow down now. I desperately want to spend more time with my son, so I have decided that I'm going to cut my work hours shorter. I've also thought about selling the house and moving to a smaller apartment so I can save more money. I still have a lot of work to do. Rebuilding my relationship with my son is not going to be an easy task because even though he is happy to be with me, he still asks about his dad and his grandparents and I don't know what to tell him. He has told me a couple of things about them, like how he had been living with his grandparents for the most part and his dad and my in-laws were only there for him for part of the day. Whenever I ask him about how it was living with his grandparents, he makes a face and says that it was not that great because everyone would constantly be fighting. And I can totally see that. It sounds like they really gave him a rough time. Just because they didn't want to take up his responsibility. I can't imagine why they would treat a child like that, but I couldn't put it past these people. They are most definitely capable of even making a little boy feel bad about himself. But anyway, I don't have to worry about that because now he is with me. Update 3. Hi, everyone. So, I can't believe I'm back here after almost 5 years. It feels kind of unreal how different my life is right now. 5 years is a really long time and so much has changed, the first being how much older my son is. We have a beautiful relationship right now and after countless therapy sessions, he and I have finally become the mother and son that we should have been right from the beginning. He's growing up to be a wonderful man and I'm sure that he will turn out to be nothing like his father because I just know it in my heart. He is 9 years old right now and already a perfect gentleman. I'm raising him on my own and I have full custody because James gave up and moved to Europe after he was out of jail. I can't say that I'm surprised. He went away with his coworker, who he had been cheating on me with, and now, they are married. I guess he just replaced his actual, biological son with the other kid. It's horrifying, but that's the kind of person that he is. As for my parents and my brother, they were out of jail after 6 months for good behavior. We have not kept in touch and they did not try to reach out to me after they were out, which I am grateful for because I don't think I would have had anything to say to them anyway. I don't have any news about my in-laws. I haven't heard about them or from them for years and it's for the best, I think. I'm living a life now. I have a stable job and a steady income, by God's grace. I'm still working at the company that I started out with my friend's business, and it's doing pretty great. So, life turned out well for me and my son and it's more than what I could have asked for. I'm truly grateful for everything.